Nation, we have jumped all around the map so far this week, and that's going to continue. Earlier on this week, we talked about Gojira. Of course, a couple of days ago, we went alternative new metal and talked about Linkin Park. And we've even talked about the Beebs. It's now time to go back to the whole realm of 90s alternative rock and bands that made it simply just one of the best decades of music. And that's the band Smashing Pumpkins with their new album, Oceania. This is an album that a lot of you guys wanted me to take the time to cover, and I'm going to do so in a very brief fashion. However, I'm going to try to narrow the scope down into a Reader's Digest condensed version for you guys. Because this is kind of an album that's difficult to talk about. Mainly because this is an album within a larger idea, or a larger album, all depending on how you really want to call it. This is an album that's within the Billy Corgan-inspired idea, Teargarden by Kaleidoscope, which was a project that was launched back in 2009, and has culminated with a series of a couple of EPs that were released, and now this album, and there will be some subsequent things after this. And there are even plans to release another CD that's going to be filled of the best tracks from what is meant to be a 44-track long concept album. That's kind of derived from the Tarot. If you guys don't know who the Smashing Pumpkins are, then there's a good chance that either A, you weren't alive in the 90s, or B, you were alive in the 90s but were very, very young and didn't really understand, or C, you've been hiding under a rock. So, whichever that one might be, if this is your first exposure to the Smashing Pumpkins, please stay with me. They were a very important force in the alternative rock genre in the 1990s, especially. And it all led up to a 2000 breakup due to internal conflicts, due to drug use, and actually spawned a couple of different side projects, such as Melissa Off-Dalmar doing a couple of successful solo albums, the Swan Ideal by Billy Corgan, which I find to be a very good album. And in the 1990s, they were remembered for songs like Tonight Tonight, 1979, Today, things like that, off of albums such as Siamese Dream, and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, which is the double album that went to #1 in the middle part of the 1990s, and is widely considered to be one of the best albums of that decade. With Oceania, we see a real return to that heaviness, and this is something that's done without the need of orchestration. This is something where the most that you're going to get aside from your traditional rock and roll sound is keyboards, and in reality, keyboards are not really all that unconventional whenever you talk about rock and roll. It's been something that's been done ever since the inception of rock and roll, so why it's deemed as unconventional by some people, I don't know. However, it is deemed unconventional by some people. This is an album that's 60 minutes in length, spans about 13 tracks, and the song ranges, the song lengths range anywhere between 3 minutes to all the way up to 9 minutes. And this is a very dreamy album in some locations. While there is a heaviness to it, there is definitely a lot of dreaminess to it that you could hear reminiscent in psychedelic rock or progressive rock. And then, of course, whenever it gets a little bit more heavy, a little bit more of that trademark 90s Smashing Pumpkins sound is just flat-out alternative rock goodness. And in reality, this is an album that is a fitting soundtrack to a late night, full of introspective thinking, full of a lot of reflection, and really just pondering the deeper meaning. This is an album that's able to accomplish that by incorporating just melodies on top of melodies in some locations, while at the same time also being very direct and forceful when necessary. However, the former is the one element that you're going to hear more often than not. There's a lot of beauty to this record. A lot of people are calling this one of the most beautiful releases of the year, and upon listening to it, it's very easy to see why. There's a lot of melodies that just kind of soothe you, while at the same time kind of make your hair stand on edge a little bit. It's almost like an album that is trying to show the beauty of the world that surrounds us, while at the same time incorporating the fact that it's not always represented that way. It's not always seen in that light. It's trying to bring about an awareness, while at the same time also being consciously aware of itself. Overall, whenever you combine this in with the Teargarden by Kaleidoscope series that has been released only via download or online up to this point, which there were a series of roughly 3 releases, this incorporates and fits itself in very nicely. Don't take this kind of like you would the Devin Townsend 4-album series that was done a year ago and was begun a year prior to that, because that's a completely different musical idea, where this was a gentleman that was trying out 4 different musical sides to essentially heal. Teargarden by Kaleidoscope is more of a revitalized effort. It's something where Billy Corgan is exploring his personal, beliefs and thoughts. And originally this was meant to be online only because he himself had claimed that the album ideal had phased out. Now obviously he reverted back to the album ideal because, well, let's face it, there's a lot of things that have gone on and transpired in the past 2 years to not only A, revitalize the interest in the album, and also B, there's a lot that you can gain by releasing an album, as far as promotion is concerned, as far as getting the word out there is concerned, and really whenever it comes to a name like the Smashing Pumpkins, this could be seen as a triumphant return. Is it truly a triumphant return? I believe so. Is it going to spawn the same radio hits that maybe propelled them to widespread acclaim in the 1990s? I don't think so. Are they really aiming for that at this point? I also don't think so. This is an album that's really meant to be all about the music within. It's not meant to really incorporate anything that's going to cross over onto the radio and become a huge smash. It's not something that is written directly for that type of idea. And while their music never really was potentially geared towards that, there were definitely songs that you could definitely just hear from the first time that you listened to them that they were probably going to be splashed onto the radio at some point in time. With these songs, maybe one or two, and that's really stretching it. The way in which modern radio is functioning, I don't think they really have a place. But that doesn't mean that this is a bad album. That also doesn't mean that this is an album that shouldn't be explored. I believe that the lavish beauty around this album is going to be surrounded by the soundscapes that are within. Billy Corgan's voice can go anywhere from soft to harsh, and whenever you are able to layer his voice on top of it, it really sets a particular mood. And it all depends on the mood that he's trying to convey, because he has a very, very good way of conveying it, whether it's supposed to be one of a little bit of desolation, a little bit of discomfort, or if it's supposed to be one that's a little bit more hopeful, a little bit more of a cheery, upbeat type thing. And with his trademark voice, it's very, very difficult to ignore, and he's easy to kind of distinguish within a crowd. So this is a voice that you're going to know, and if this is your first exposure to the Smashing Pumpkins, you're going to get used to in a hurry. Overall, I like this album, but I'm not sure if I would count it amongst the best in their discography. It's kind of one of those ones that kind of peruse the middle of the road. The beautiful aspects of this album caused me to really elevate it a little bit more, because there's a stronger musical direction that seems to be present with this record, within a record, so to speak. And also, it's extremely focused. It's not one that seems to have to jumble and jump around in order to get its point across, or to try to distinguish which ones should be on the radio and which ones are just kind of meant to be there because of free-form exploration and true musical evolution. So overall, I'm going to have to give this album a solid 7 out of 10, which would be roughly around a 3.5 to 4 stars out of 5, because I really like what this album's able to accomplish. I like the dreamy aspect. I like the fact that there is the incorporation of some progression, some psychedelia, all things, though, that I'm very used to with the Smashing Pumpkins. So, as far as breaking new incredible ground, there's not much there for me. But, for somebody who's a first-time listener, they might listen to this and really get inspired. And that's kind of one of the other purposes of this album, and that's to inspire a new generation of Pumpkins fans. So if you're not a Pumpkins fan, check this album out. If it's your cup of tea, then definitely become a second-generation fan. If you're a long-time fan of the Pumpkins, the boys are back and releasing records, so go and pick it up now. That's all I have to say. This is probably a little longer than I expected it to be, but fuck it, who cares? Once I get started talking about something, it's hard for me to shut up. I'll talk to you guys later.